Look, the leadership space, as you know, being in it for such a long time, is such a broad area. But I think as I was looking at the work that you do, there were so many different things that we could talk about today. But I think what stood out for me was this topic about mental toughness. And, of course, coming out of the pandemic, one would have to go, wow, that really would have to be an important thing to deal with, right? But I have to be honest with you. When I first, and this is the same with me around the topic of resilience, by the way, when I first hear things like mental toughness, I'm immediately transported into my own upbringing about mental toughness and, the really soldier on, get on with things. And that actually has been to the detriment of my burnout and stress over the years, because I would just soldier on and do things like that, which I think can be a pitfall. So I guess where I would like to start is really your views about this, and your views about mental toughness and why you bring it up in the context of leadership.
Yeah, great question, Kylie. I think if we look at the classic definition of mental toughness, right, I think one of the textbook definitions would be that it is really about it's a personality trait or style, right? It's the way that we would look at difficult situations and how we can manage those regardless of the context that we are in. So can we deal with pressure and stress regardless of the situation, right, that we are in? Now, I think you're right. There is an element of pushing through, soldiering on, right, when things get tough. And so my definition is a little bit different, right? My definition that I've kind of evolved, that I use in my coaching and our programs, very much around the fact that it's knowing when to push and to push through, but it's also knowing when to pull back, right?
Right.
And I think when you've got that ability and that awareness to be able to do that, you are more likely to prevent things like burnout, like you said correctly, not only for ourselves, but for the people around us. And I find this a lot. I've seen some leaders, particularly putting up comments around how working from home is fantastic, how they're really enjoying, that context. Meanwhile, they're sitting in their home office, being paid millions of dollars, and their frontline staff are dealing with customers on a daily basis out there in the real world, right? And I wondered to myself whether people actually have that sense of awareness on these components, right? And how they're supporting their people as leaders during times like this. And so we use a very simple framework. I'm sure we'll get into it, as we talk about it today. But there are 4 elements that are absolutely vital to developing mental toughness and resilience in ourselves. And the research on this is 25 years old. It's super clear that it is probably the most important right now in a post-COVID environment, to nurture and develop. And if we can do this for ourselves, for our people, we are giving them a massive uplift in their lives.
Well, I'm definitely interested in going straight there because, I think in what I heard you say, your definition is knowing the difference between when to push and when to pull back. And I think what I heard you say in the middle of that was that it was about the awareness in order to be able to do that. Because when you are in the middle of, when things coming at you and you're dealing with life in the moment, which is often where you really need it to happen, is what do you need to be able to develop in order to have that awareness present so you do make the right decision at the time, So are those 4 things designed to influence the ability to impact awareness? Like, is it really then ultimately about that, or where does that start?
Yeah, so I think awareness is, a number of ways of being able to get that for each person. I mean, there is a tool out there, and there are many tools out there that you can use to obviously capture that information. I think sometimes the best way is to ask people around us, right? And to create an environment as leaders where we can receive that feedback and that information, right? That is super challenging when, most leaders accelerate through their careers. And so all they're getting is all this positive reinforcement that they're doing a great job. And then all of a sudden they're well above everybody else. And they may not have created a culture around them where people are willing to give them that feedback, right? And they're willing to be honest, right? And vulnerable.
Yes. Well, we certainly know that. I mean, my own days of leadership and having to do many 360-degree reports and seeing a very big range of responses of people's, openness to hearing what other people have to say.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a mixed bag. But let's go back to what you were saying about the
Mm.
the framework or the process and how you do it.
Mm. So there are, I mean, and this is not my model. This is a model that was created actually by a not-for-profit based out of the UK called AQR. So any of your listeners can kind of go off to their website and have a look. And it's probably the most researched and validated framework that exists on the planet around this topic. And there are 4 C's, so it's really easy to remember. The first one is around control, right? Life control and emotional control. So if you're mentally tough, you genuinely tend to have a belief that you are the bus driver of your life, not the passenger, right? The things that you do, and in fact, in sports psychology, we work with athletes around the world. You would say it's controlling the controllables, right? That's the kind of mindset that you would take on. So someone lower in mental toughness would very much believe they are a victim, right, of their lives, and things are happening to them, right? And that is devastating. So that's kind of life control. The other part is emotional control, which, we might consider as similar to emotional intelligence, but it's actually about choosing the right emotion at the right time, at the right intensity. And so, that's super important in terms of how you present yourself, but also how that impacts your fellowship as well, which I think is important. From that, we move on to things like sort of commitment, right? Commitment is what I call stickability, right? Do I stick to the task until it gets done, right? Am I willing to do whatever it takes, right, to get there? And sometimes you can use different tools, goals, different kind of frameworks that kind of help us, to do that. Another thing is around, or the other C, if you like, is around challenge, right? And as challenges come up, what are the ways in which we approach challenge? And one of my favorite terms is this word called probability. Have you heard of that before?
No, I have not. You better say that one again. What is it?
So probability, it's a Six Sigma term.
Right.
That actually is 2 words, problem and opportunity. Every problem has an opportunity.
Ah, gotcha.
And I think, those who are mentally tough in this area of dealing with challenges have that probability mindset, right? They can just very quickly turn that negative spin into something, or reframe it into something positive, which is helpful. And they're also willing to take more risks. They're willing to do things differently, right?
Yeah.
The other part, the final part, which is probably the foundational piece, is the last of the 4 C's, confidence. And this is about your own confidence in your abilities, but also what we call interpersonal confidence. And that is, can I stand up for what I believe? So if I'm in a room and I'm hearing other people say a whole bunch of things that I just do not agree with, am I going to be an observer and kind of sit in the background? Or am I going to stand up for what I believe and say something? Right? And it's the combination of those 4 things, Kylie, that really make a massive difference. When we excel in those areas, when we pull those things together, the research tells us we actually lift our performance by around 20%.
Wow.
Right? So, and just to give you a sense of what that means, academic intelligence is around 7% that contributes to lifting performance. We're talking about something almost 3 times more effective, right?
Right.
So,
well, and if you're anything like me, I'm a lover of numbers. If anything's measurable, then
yes,
if you're going to put
absolutely.
your effort somewhere, certainly put it in the bucket where you're going to get the biggest result, right? And for for our audience especially, we're talking with people that are really, leading businesses either as executives or, they're founders and startup entrepreneurs. And they are in an environment, in roles that really, you'd have to say their capacity and the time that they have to spread their time across things is small. So, I think it's even more important, right, to focus on the things that are going to yield the biggest benefit. So
Yeah.
I kind of want to, whilst we talk about this topic, I'm interested in your your personal journey and experience with this field, because you've been doing this for a long time. And I know before we got started, you talked about, you know, the move even over to Dubai, where your HQ is based, that it was just before the global financial crisis. So you've seen a lot of crisis, let's say, in the world, and you've been a business owner and a leader yourself throughout that time. So I am curious, from, you know, from your own personal experience, where you've noticed that this area of mental toughness has really had an impact on you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time I would have seen this is even a bit further back. It's beginning at the turn of the century, and my daughters constantly remind me about how old or how long ago that is.
Sorry, I have to frame this again, because for people that come in for the first time and hear me laugh, I've often said to people, laughter for me is nothing more than having a sense of humor around my ability to resonate with what you're saying, because my kids say exactly the same thing to me. I'm like, yeah, you dress like you are, you know,
Yeah.
anyway, by the by, but it's not a laughing matter in many cases, but I get what you're saying. So
Yeah.
it's
So
a good reminders.
talk about building mental toughness. Have kids.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think when I was an intern psych, and this is the turn of the century, I attended a 7 o'clock call in the northwest of Sydney when the Speedo manufacturing plant was being shut down.
Right.
And about 8 of us were standing there, you know, in suits, basically waiting for the general manager to announce to the shop floor staff, and there's about 80 or 90 people there, that they were going to lose their jobs that day. It was literally a 10-minute conversation that he had. And it was at that point, Kylie, that I noticed the extremes of how people deal with mental toughness. Now, I didn't know the label at the time. I didn't know how to interpret that. You know, I was 21 years old, 22 years old, right, at the time.
Mm.
And I remember different forms of reactions, right? Some people had gone catatonic. They were frozen. They didn't know what to do, right? Some people were weeping, right? They were probably the primary breadwinner. This is something they'd done for 25, 30 years of their life. They didn't know what else they were going to do. Some people were picking up chairs and throwing them, right, out of complete frustration and anger, right? And I think at the time, that was the first time in a work context that I had seen how people might deal with, you know, stress and pressure in that kind of environment, right? In fact, that's something that I still do to this day, where we help organizations, you know, to release that kind of information to people, you know, which typically takes them to the lowest point in their professional lives. So I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Up in the Air with George Clooney.
Yes, I have. One of my
I
favorites.
am the bald version of that.
Oh no.
So I think that was my life, right? It was about
Right.
actually trying to help
Right.
people in that moment. Now, what I noticed at the time, and I couldn't put a framework around it till, you know, much later on. In fact, it wasn't until 2013 that I stumbled upon this framework. But the people who demonstrated those 4 C's, commitment, challenge, control, confidence, they were the ones who could get back on track so much more quickly. They were the ones who were able to find jobs and pick themselves out of that mess, right? Emotionally, mentally, and take themselves to a better place. And I think, you know, all of us can pinpoint people in our lives who do this, right? And, you know, they find themselves in better positions because of that mindset in those areas. And so I think that was my first proper introduction to that. Dubai, absolutely. You know, when the financial crisis hit, I think I'd been in town for 4 months, and, you know, literally people were leaving their cars at the airport with the keys in the ignition and flying away, never to come back because they wouldn't be allowed, right? People were being told that they were lost their jobs when they turn up to the office with a red sticker that would tell them they'd have to pack their bags and leave within 15 minutes, right? That's how they were told that they were going to leave. So it was a very unpleasant period of time. And having said that, obviously the country rebounded, the world rebounded and kind of moved on. But people don't forget. And I think that's one of the things that has really impacted, I know, my generation, right? When I think about job security and I think about the way we look at work and as leaders, their sense of impermanence, right, about what it is we do. is probably the strongest it's ever been in the history of mankind, right, when it comes to work. And I think, what does that mean for us as leaders? If we're trying to engage a group of people, right, to commit to something over 2, 3, 4 years, and in the back of their mind, they know there's impermanence, right? How do we do that? How do we create a story, right? So yeah, that was kind of the first time that I really got into that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you did mention, well, and I know being a business owner, I think just as a business owner, I mean, it's that in itself takes something. I mean, knowing, especially over the duration of time, and so your own accountability and making sure that you're able to survive through those periods of time. I imagine there would have been moments for you where you've really had to. Well, I don't know. I guess that's the question to ask is, did you find there were times, in running a business where you really had to pull the levers or look at your own 4Cs, for example, and how things were playing out, and what would you say were some of the biggest lessons for you?
How long have we got?
What's the first one? What's the first one that comes to mind? All right. What is the biggest blunder? What was call it blunder? Look, I've tried to take a lot of the word mistake out of my dialogue because I don't believe in mistakes, and because it doesn't set us up for identifying the lesson. But look, one of the things that I often way in which to pinpoint a particular story that is most impactful, there's one of two ways, right? Often there's the biggest obstacle we've ever overcome, right? You talk about the fact that your name is about removing obstacles. So no doubt you remove obstacles. So I'm curious, I guess, from your point of view, what was one of the biggest obstacles you had to overcome for yourself, right? It could correlate to the other side of the coin, which the other question I ask is, well, what is the biggest accomplishment you've had? Because often the biggest accomplishment can sometimes come out of the biggest learning, but I don't know. How does that go? Have you got a place? Like, perhaps the biggest? I'm going to go with the biggest obstacle, Gudge, because I really love what you said about your purpose when you connect with your Buddhism about removing the obstacles. What have you found for yourself has been one of the biggest obstacles you've had to remove?
Yeah, I think with Hinduism, it's been very much around my own mindset has been the biggest obstacle. And I'll give you an example, Kylie. So my last little formal gig, right, in the Middle East before I set up my own business, and I've been wanting to set up my own business for so long, and it's that classic, that script that goes off in your mind, right? You're not going to be good enough. You got too much on the line. How are the kids going to go to school? What if you fail? What is it going to look like? All that kind of stuff that goes on in your head. And to add to that, I was living in the desert with nobody, right? Nobody around me. My family wasn't there. It was just us, right? And so I think I was very fortunate that I had a mentor. I was working for a company called Talent 2, running their HR consultancy practice. A guy called Andrew Banks was one of the owners. And Banksy told me, look, you need to go off and do your own thing. Right? I'm not sure what you're doing. You need to trust yourself, back yourself, go and do it for you and your family, right? Now, I think he told me that after he'd actually sold the business. So he was fine. He was happy for me to move on. He's a good businessman. He's one of the Shark Tank guys, right? So you'll see.
Oh, right. Yes.
So look, I respect Banksy. I took his advice on board, and I didn't do what he told me to do.
I respect your advice, but sadly not.
It was the imposter syndrome, the imposter experience, right?
Right. Yes.
I took one more gig, but then it just didn't feel good. And after 9 months, decided to set up with 2 other partners to set up Kompass, our business. And every day, Kylie, I would wake up in that business and I would go for a walk along Jumeirah Beach. This is at 5:30 in the morning, and I wouldn't have slept well that night. And I'd be thinking to myself, how am I going to make this work? I've taken this plunge. I've gotten a retainer that kind of pays some of the bills, but how is this going to work long term? And this happened for about a month and a half, right? I was just not able to sleep. I was fidgeting and just stressed out. Anyway, I eventually realized I was focusing on the wrong things. And the conversation I had with myself was, what am I going to get from this? What am I going to get from this? What is my family going to get from this, right? Rather than saying, well, what is the value I'm going to create in the world? What is the purpose or impact I'm going to create? How do I start with that and then work backwards, right? So I did that. And out of that, I don't know whether it's the universe or whatever happens, I just started focusing on the things that were in my control, right? And it became a lot easier for me to focus on those things because I could influence them, right? It's a great Stanford study, right, that says 82% of the things we worry about never happen, right?
That's right.
And I think where should we spend our cognitive energy? Well, spend it on the things that you can influence and you can control.
Yes.
Spend it there. And so that's what I did. And I think out of that really came this reconfirmation of how powerful, that concept is. And it really crystallized and made my life a lot more clear and focused around our vision, around what we're trying to achieve. Now, of course, there's ups and downs, right? And I think, we have, arguments between partners. We have issues with clients not paying on time. We have, projects that don't work out, and there's project creep and all sorts of stuff, that happens. We have financial markets crashing all around us. All of that comes and goes. And I think reverting back to that script that is helpful in our minds. And for me, a massive lesson has been, what is the support system I have put in place for me during these challenging times, right? Thinking that I've got to carry that burden all by myself was such a dysfunctional way of thinking, right? And I carried that for most of my life. And it was a boss that told me this when I was a grad, actually, and I didn't register till that period of time later on, where they said, look, you've got one of the biggest fears of failure that we've seen out of this psychometric. You'd be great in sales, right? and I took it as a positive, I think. But they said something to me straight after, which was, but you know what, Gudge? Start running towards success rather than away from failure. It's much more fun, right? And I think that flip, right, for me, really forced me, Kylie, to focus on things that were much more enjoyable. Yes, you have to plan for contingencies, right? That could go wrong. But if you spend most of your life there, it's a pretty miserable life, right, that we live. And I was choosing to spend time there. And I think it's part of my culture. It's part of being a collectivist culture. We do that, right? But I think I had to shift. And so that was super helpful. So I don't know if that's
it's really fascinating. I think the thing that I'm just really noticing is how well, firstly, I noticed my assumption that I would have thought that would be easier for someone like yourself for two reasons. One is you're a psychologist, right? So one goes, well, he has the academic know-how to do that, right? So that's the first thing I noticed. But the second thing was that you did say that you started this business with two other people. Is that right? So I guess, again, another assumption, but, would it be fair to say that also having two other people that you're accountable with gave you a space to be able to, and I guess it's not just share the load, right? But you really got someone where you're bouncing other stuff off, or you're not just in a hole by yourself trying to work stuff out. You've got the opportunity to really, get varying perspectives on things. Is that fair to say?
Oh, that would be absolutely fair. And I think, on those two very valid points that you raise, I think, being a psychologist, absolutely, in theory, is wonderful. We do have access to tools. However, here's a big however. The thing that I've noticed is that we are terrible, all of us, at being objective about ourselves.
Psychologists are? Is that what you're saying?
All of us.
All humans.
All humans
are terrible
at being objective about ourselves.
So I want to ask the real question.
Goes out the window almost.
That's right. But so is it like, is it true then that, and look, I can't even say true, but I'm just going to say it because it rolls off the brain, right? But so my husband is a cabinet maker. He makes kitchens. So of course the cabinets in our house are probably the worst kitchen cabinets in the street. Is it true that a psychologist's brain is the messiest brain in the group of people? Are we literally?
There probably is a lot of stuff going on because we're holding a lot of secrets. We're holding a lot of information, right, on people as well, which is fascinating at the same time. And I think we're so outwardly focused on helping other people that we don't necessarily apply the same principles, right? And that's the thing I had to learn, was I had to just apply within, right? And that was the key message for me. So it's a lot easier for me now than it was before, but it's an ongoing journey, right? I think, we never stop, right, in terms of just that development process. So I think that first piece was around, that. And I think you're absolutely right with having additional partners make such a massive difference in that load. And I do talk about it from that perspective, that, feeling like you need to have this balance. And, I coach a lot of founders and a lot of, sort of startup founders. And one of the things that I find is that they really do take that pressure onto themselves in a way that is quite unhealthy and unnecessary. And a lot of it comes from our insecurities and our fears, right? And I think, going back to your point, Kylie, where do these massive opportunities for improvement come from? They come from our dark places. They come from the places that we want to put the lid on and we want to cover up and not talk about. And within that is this beauty and richness that tends to come out. So I think part of my role really is to help uncover that. And to help me, I needed to do that for myself. To happen.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So one of the questions that I do like to ask is specifically, what in fact, the entire purpose behind the podcast in particular was really to create a whole new paradigm when it comes to our view of leadership, because, you and I and many in the world who are in positions of leadership, say, have come through an era and are of a generation that leadership was something that you did once you did get to a position, but as we know, that's not leadership, and that's not what it is to be a leader. So but it is one of those things that many people talk about, well, we want to have more women in leadership, and we do talk about the influence and impact based on people's positions. But my interest is in getting people out of that space, because then they have the opportunity to express it regardless of where they sit, right? So that with that in mind, I think one of the things that I have noticed is leadership really is a very personal view. In fact, because every single person I've spoken to has a very different view. And in being able to identify that, I think that helps reflect on what you were saying, which is you got to go really take a look from within about how to be your best self. So I'm interested in your view on it, because this is an area you've specialized, not only that you've specialized in a lot that you see in the world. So the way that I like to look at it, though, is to really have it kind of come from within. So I'm going to give you a statement. I'm going to ask you to complete the statement for me.
Sure. I love this.
Great. A leader is someone who
leads from within.
Wow, look at that. Boom.
Word association, I think.
I don't know. Is that what you call deep listening?
Probably. Or cheating, I think, one of the two.
Well, in the context of today's world, where do you see that sitting, though? Like, how if you had to say, let's just say that's true. Let's just say that's the only answer, right? And if we say, yes, leadership is a great leader is someone who leads from within, in your view, based on the work that you've been not only doing for years, but you do now, where would you say we're sitting on the scale of having successfully accomplished that's the way to go? Like, if we say 0 to 10, 0, we're doing really bad on actually doing the work. 10, we're doing extraordinarily well. Where do we sit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, right? I guess we could make a general comment on where things are. And there's going to be pockets, obviously, in certain areas that are great. But I think we're only scratching the surface on what this actually looks like. So it's sub 5 for me. Part of the reason, I think, if we break down the word leader and ship, if we look at the word ship, for me, it's a vessel. It's a vessel, and it first needs to be, the vessel first is yourself. It's your body, it's your mind. How are we looking after ourselves, right, to be able to do that mentally and physically? And the amount of sleep studies, for example, that I'm seeing coming out talking about how can you function at your best and lead people if you are not actually even getting the decent amount of sleep and the right amount of REM cycles, right, that are going through each evening. So I think that's kind of an important thing. The other thing is about the ship is then it's about taking a group of people with you somewhere, right?
Mm.
And I think, you know, for me, leading people means you're leading them to somewhere. So where are you going, right? So having that sense of your own personal vision and direction, but then also being able to then do something that you do beautifully, which is to tell a story around this, right? So how am I going to do this in a way that resonates for me authentically, but also that takes those other people with me in a way that makes sense to them?
Mm.
And I think for me, it has to start from here. And, you know, it goes back to this sort of sense of motivators and values, right? These external or extrinsic versus intrinsic, internal. So if we were to look at some leaders who are financially driven, right? They're in there, they want to get the share price up. All the metrics that they're given to lead a company are based on the ASX return, based on, you know, the amount of profitability that they have, all those kind of numbers. That is a surefire way of being able to drive a very insidious form of governance, right, on a company. If we manage to change those KPIs to those internal ones around that sense of collaboration and teamwork and, you know, accomplishment, all those kind of things, I think some magic would seriously happen in those businesses. Because all of a sudden you're driving a value set and a belief set. And what do we know in psychology? That beliefs are simply repeated thoughts. Thoughts affect feelings, and feelings affect behavior. So if you want people to do the things that you want them to do, what are you going to get them to believe, right? That's why they're so important. And it's got to start with what we believe. And I think if we're going to be consistent, and look, I can talk on this, I want to get off my high horse here, but I think that is something I personally struggled with, right? Is coming up with that personal belief, trusting in myself that I don't have to have a vision that aligns to everybody, right? That is not the purpose. The purpose is actually being true to yourself, and those other people will come along with you and support you, right? Because you know, they're bought into that.
Well, you've really pointed to, I guess, the thing that I really actually I think is really a great thing to complete on today, and that's why do you do this? So why do you do this?
I do this because one of my key whys or purposes is about leaving a trail of happiness consistently behind me, right? Now, I can't do that with any sense of legitimacy for myself without knowing that it's actually coming from a good place, right? And that it's going to last longer than I've been there. And so if I go away, it's a bit like having these personal trainers, right? Where you have them for years and years, right? I mean, that means they're probably not.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
What are you talking about?
A great personal trainer, like a good psychologist, should be able to give you the tools that you need so that you don't need to be dependent on them, right? So that is actually, I think, a sign for me that I've departed in a way that is actually helpful, right?
Yes.
And for me, that is, you know, what leadership is about. It's about giving people the opportunity to go down their path that they choose, but some tools and some stories and beliefs that they can take with them.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. There's so many really great pieces of gold in what you've shared, and thank you for sharing some of your personal story too. What is the what is actually the best way for people to connect with you, Gudge?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so under Gudge Ravichandra. I'm on Instagram, and I'm actually on TikTok. Would you believe?
Oh, you are not! Oh my God, I keep getting messages. You got to get yourself on TikTok, and I'm like,
funny story. So I actually went up a couple of notches on my. I've got two daughters on their dad belt, because a couple of videos got like over 100,000 views or something, and all of a sudden, I don't know what I did. It was just I can't repeat it. But anyway, it
what, it wasn't dancing in the lounge room or anything, was it?
Yeah, no. I think it was a lot of pointing on a screen.
All right, right.
But I think there is an audience, and I think it's what, you know, that was a great reminder to me about my limited thinking and limited view on life, right? And about how to expand myself, which was interesting.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Well, thanks again so much for joining us today. It's good to have you back in Australia. And we're going to put all the contact details for you, as well as links to your company, Kompass, inside the show notes so people can reach out and connect with you. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks, Kylie, and loving what you do. So really appreciate it, and looking forward to catching up again soon.
Yep, thank you.